Well, welcome back to the homestead. Today is a little bit of a milestone for us because it's our 100th episode, and we're also at a milestone on the house because we just wrapped up the outside of it. So we're starting to work on the electrical and the plumbing on the inside. So rather than pushing forward with a building video today, I thought I'd do something a little different. And I'm going to take some time and do a cost breakdown of what I have in the house today and how much I expect to have in the house by the time it's finished, and then review some questions and answers from the last 99 videos. So let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so one of the questions I get asked a lot on my channel is, how much does it cost to build your own house? How much are you saving by doing it yourself? And the answer is roughly half of the cost of the house. So in general, when you're doing a new construction house, 50% of the cost of the house is material and 50% of the cost is labor. If you build it yourself, you obviously don't pay labor and you save half of the cost of the house. So here in Central Arkansas, I spoke with a local contractor and he charges $110 a square foot to build a house. And the house behind me that I'm building is 2,500 square feet. So that cost, if I had that local contractor come out and build the house, would be $275,000. If I can build it myself, I should have roughly $137,500 in it, which is half of that cost. And so far, with the outside of the house finished, with the exception of the brick veneer on the cinder blocks, the handrails and the steps, I have $69,300 invested in it. And that leaves me another $68,000 to come in at 50% to finish out the inside of the house. Now, do I expect to be able to finish the inside of the house for $68,000? Not really. I think it's going to cost me a little bit more than that, just based on the type of HVAC I want, the cabinets and counters that my wife wants, and I don't have time or place to build, so we're going to have to purchase those. And then the hardwood flooring that I want to put in, I think it's probably going to cost a little bit more than $68,000 to finish out. So if we can finish the inside of the house for $70,000 or $80,000, then I'll be pretty happy with that. And I'll have, a little under $150,000 invested in the house. And the house is sitting on 16 acres of land. Now the land is not included in this price. We bought the land at an auction, and that was another $56,000 that I paid for the land. So the house, I'm looking at having a little under $150,000 in it, and about $56,000 invested in the land. So when it's all said and done, I'll have 2,500 square foot house on 16 acres, and it'll be a little under, or right around $200,000 doing it myself. I would consider it to be a significant savings and definitely worth a few weekends to come out here and do it myself. And in general, the only time I work on the house is pretty much on Saturdays, and I don't get every Saturday to work on it. So right now I've got, I think this November will be 3 years that I've been working on the house. So 3 years of weekends, and we're going to have a pretty nice homestead when we're finished with it. So I think it's a worthwhile investment to build yourself if you find yourself with a setup that allows you the luxury of that much time to do it. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump in and start answering some of the viewer questions that have been asked over the last 99 episodes, and see what y'all are asking. All right, so back in episode 3, Rebecca Stack asked, what are the measurements of the house? And the house is 48 feet, 7 inches long, and 32 feet deep. And then there's a 8-foot wraparound porch all the way around it. And the total living area is 2,500 square feet. It's 1,500 square feet downstairs and another 1,000 square feet upstairs. All right, so David Beard asked why I poured 22-inch wide footers rather than doing the standard 16-inch footers. And one of the reasons I did that was whenever I bought the land, there was a stand of trees here. So I had to cut all the trees and then dig up the roots from it. And there was a lot of dirt work being done there. and I wanted to make sure that the house was on a solid foundation and there was no settling issues. So after all the roots were dug out and I recompacted the dirt and I dug our footers in, I just felt a little better going down 16 inches instead of 12 like the contractors wanted to do. And then I actually poured 22 inches wide instead of 16 inches wide to help distribute the load a little bit. Now, it's overkill, but because I'm saving so much money doing it myself, I felt better putting a little bit extra money into the concrete for the foundation to ensure that the house is on a good footing. Also, when I poured the stem wall around the house, by pouring a little bit extra wide footer, I've got a concrete ledge out in front of the cinder blocks that when I go to wrap the stone veneer, that stone veneer can rest on that concrete ledge for some additional support as it goes all the way around, because I'm planning on using real stone rather than the man-made stone, which is a lot lighter. So using the real stone, I want to have a ledge for it to start on, the same as you would if you were going to put brick on a house. You would have a brick ledge. So I have a stone ledge around the foundation. So that was kind of why I went with a little bit wider footers than what were standard. All right, so back in episode 5, John Gardner asked me if all of my footers had to be level one to another. And no, they don't. They all have to be level, and they all have to be a 4-inch increment to one another. So what I'm saying is, if the front footer is lower than the next footer, it needs, whatever the difference is, it has to be evenly divisible by 4. And the reason for that is you can get a half height block that is 4 inches, or you can get a full height block that's 8 inches. And as long as you can lay a number of blocks to get the front footer level to the next footer, you know, that's all you're looking for. The only thing that has to be level to each other is the very top. So no, when you're pouring the footers, they're not all going to be level to each other unless you're laying on a perfectly flat grade. Otherwise, they're going to be off from each other, and they just have to be a 4-inch increment within each other. So I hope that helps, John. And back in episode 6, Curtis Williams asked me how many cinder blocks did I use in total doing my foundation. And I used 940 full blocks, 70 half height blocks. So those are the 4-inch tall blocks rather than the 8-inch. And then 30 half blocks. So that's an 8-inch tall block, but it's only 8-inch long. And that's how many blocks I laid. So it was a pretty good bit of blocks, and like I said, that's the first cinder blocks I've ever laid. So it was quite a challenge, but I think it came out pretty good. And then Humbird asked back in episode 14, is there a reason that I chose to build my house up off of the ground rather than building it on a concrete slab? And yes, the reason I did that was I have a lot of knee trouble. If I stand on concrete, my knees hurt. So I did not want to build my house on a concrete slab. If you build a house on a conventional or raised foundation like this, you're on floor joists or trusses, and there's some give in the floor when you're walking. So those don't hurt my knees nearly as much as concrete does. So for my comfort, I went ahead and chose to do a raised foundation. Now, the fact that my house is on a little bit of a hilltop here, that kind of lends itself towards a raised foundation also, because if I had done a slab, there would have had to been a lot of dirt work done there, and that would have raised the cost and wouldn't have made a slab really a feasible idea. It could have been done, but it just would have cost a little bit more to do it. But yeah, the reason I went with a raised foundation was simply because of my knees. My knees hurt when I stand on concrete. I didn't want my house to be a concrete slab, so built it on a raised foundation. All right, so back in episode 20, when I was laying the walls of the house out, Prepper Nation asked me whether or not the north and south orientation of the house played any part in the design. And no, it really didn't. When I found this land, there's a creek right behind the house. And the little knoll there is where I wanted to put a house, and it really doesn't have any other way that it can be facing. But that's really the orientation that I wanted the house for the layout of the property, and where I position the house where I can overlook the creek off of the back porch. And since the house is not a passive solar house, the orientation for north and south really doesn't matter that much on this house. Now I will say the orientation of this house is almost perfectly solar south. So the back roof of the house, if I chose to put solar panels on there, they would be in almost the perfect orientation for solar south. And that's something that I may do in the future, but that's just happened to be a lucky coincidence. The orientation of the house was because of the layout of the property and the view that I wanted of the creek off of the back porch. So no, north and south really didn't play any role in my positioning of the house or the house design. World's Best asked me, where did I get my house design from? Where did I buy the blueprints, or did I design it myself? And yeah, I designed the house myself. My wife and I looked through I don't know how many design books, and we never could find blueprints that we wanted. And we looked through online websites of I don't know how many different house designs, never did find what we wanted. So what I did was I went and I bought a program called Home Designer Professional by Chief Architect, and we did the blueprints ourselves of exactly what we wanted. And that took quite a bit of time, and we changed the layout quite a few times. So it's been a labor of love, and I think when we're finished with the house, it's going to be exactly what we're looking for, and we're going to be really glad that we took the extra time and effort to design what we wanted instead of just accepting the closest thing that we could find. So yeah, I designed it myself. Sorry, I can't point you to a place to find the plans, but if you like it, just get you a CAD program and sit down and make exactly what you want. It's really not that hard. It just takes time. So give it a go. Russ Cherry asked me when I was sanding the interior walls, would it have helped to cover the floor with a heavy plastic before you put the walls up, just to protect the floor until you dried it in? And probably not in my case. If you go back and you look at the episodes where I was putting the interior walls up, you'll see I made a serious mistake, and it's on me. But when I stood the exterior walls of the house up, I did not cut the thresholds of the doors out. And basically what that did was make a big lake the first time I got a rain. There was nowhere for the water to go once it hit the floor. It couldn't run off. So when I came back and I found that and I cut the thresholds of the door out, then all the water ran off and everything was good to go. But covering the floor really wouldn't have helped me in that case, because you're not going to find a piece of plastic big enough to cover a 50 by 30 area, I don't think, and the chances of me getting that rolled out without poking holes in it is next to none. But also, the type subfloor that I used is called Advantech, and that's actually rated for exposure to the weather for up to a year before you get the house dried in, and that's why I went with that product. It is a strand board flooring, but there's an extra coating in there that helps protect it from the water so it doesn't swell up and absorb all that. So yeah, I should have cut the thresholds out, and I wouldn't have had any issues with water. As it is right now, I did get a little bit of swelling at the joints on the subfloor, so I'll have to go back and sand those before I lay my final flooring. But all in all, the structure of the floor is not damaged, and I don't think I could have got a single piece of plastic to cover it and put it out there without poking a hole in it. And if you got a hole in it, it would have let that water through anyway. So in my particular case, I don't think it would have helped. Now, if you're using just a regular plywood floor or strand board floor that wasn't rated for exposure to water, yeah, you probably need to get that covered. But in my case, where I went wrong was I didn't cut my thresholds out when I stood the walls up. So if you do build yourself, that's one thing I highly recommend. Cut your thresholds out as soon as you stand your walls up. Junk Mail 203 asked me back in episode 29, how much did it cost for me to hire out the trusses being built? And the reason I had to go with trusses is my living room is 19 feet plus clear span, and a 2x12 in today's Southern Pine won't span that far. It's not rated for that large of a span. So I had to get some kind of a floor truss built to carry that load. And I was looking at some of the I-beams, and I contacted somebody locally here to see how much the trusses would cost. And they gave me a quote on it, and then they said, but you know, for another $1,500, we could build the roof truss that would include the floor and the upstairs rooms already framed out. And that sounded like a really good deal to me. So I went ahead and had them build my trusses, which actually framed out the entire upstairs. And the cost of that was $7,062. And I still think that was money well spent. That is one of the things that I did have to hire out on the house, was having the trusses built, and then I had to hire somebody to come in and set those trusses up, because they were, I believe, 400 plus pounds per truss, and I couldn't set those myself, so we had to hire a crane truck to come in, and I got a local contractor to come out with the crane truck, set the trusses, and deck the roof while they were here, so that it would all be done for me, and I just had to put the metal roof on. So the cost of the trusses was $7,062. All right, so back in episode 32, when I was doing the metal roof, Robert Bray asked me, is there a different code in your area, as we're required to screw into the rib and not the valley when putting the metal roofs on? And I'm not sure about the codes, to be honest with you. The metal roof system that I have, I put on per the manufacturer specs, not a local building code. The manufacturer specs are that you screw it in the valley, and they tell you how far apart the screws have to be from each other and how many rows you have to have per span, and all that. So that's what I went by when I was putting the roof on, was the manufacturer's recommendation. And the screws that we used on that have a neoprene washer under them to seal off. So even though the hole is in the valley, there's a neoprene washer between the metal and the screw head to keep water from getting in behind the tin. And then I actually paid for the upgraded screws that have a metal cap to go over the top of the washer, so that the sun cannot degrade the neoprene to rot the washer out. So the roof as it is supposed to have a 40-year warranty on the metal, and since I did the installation myself, the warranty's on me. But yeah, the code that I used to put it on was just a manufacturer's recommendation, not a building code. I'm out in the county, so I don't have a building inspector to come out and check my work based off of a building code. So manufacturer's recommendation is what I used. Back in episode 36, Julio Oliveira, I hope I'm saying that right, he wanted to know how the porch posts are attached to the foundation, because he couldn't see the screws in the videos and all. So the way that the porch columns are attached to the bottom of the foundation, you've got the cinder block wall, and then there's J-hooks or anchor bolts cemented into the cinder block, and then there's a treated seal plate that lays on top of that and gets bolted to the concrete wall. And then the 6x6 porch posts are sitting on top of that seal plate, and they're screwed on each side all the way around into the seal plate. And then there's a rim joist that goes on the outside of the seal plate, so that is attached to both the seal plate and the porch. And then there's actually joist that touch the post on another side. So two sides of the post are nailed to, and then the bottom is screwed all the way around, and that's how it's attached to the cinder block wall. So hope that helps. Quentin Puckett asked me in episode 38 what kind of blade it was that I was using on the skill saw to cut the metal roofing. And that was just a Irwin metal blade. It's a 60-tooth carbide tip blade, specifically made for cutting metal, and that's what I used to cut it. Now they do have some power shears that you can get to cut it as well, but I didn't have those. I did have the skill saw, and that's what I wound up using. Plus, with the skill saw, I could make multiple cuts, stack the tin, and then run the skill saw down that one time and cut 4 or 5 sheets at one time if I had multiple cuts that were all the same to make. So, and I believe I went through 2 of those metal blades before I finished the roof. So, hope that helps. Jim Earl asked me what was the purpose of the 2x4s that ran horizontal across the roof. And that was one of the things I was glad that I didn't have a building inspector to come out and tell me that this is exactly how you have to build your roof, because I built the roof the way that I wanted to do it. So what I have is I've got my trusses, and then I've got an OSB decking on top of that, and then I've got a felt paper like you would on a traditional shingled roof that goes over the OSB, and then on top of that I've got horizontal runners from end to end of the house that are 2x4s. Now those runners are what the sheet metal is actually attached to, and what that does is it spaces the metal roofing 1.5 inches off of the OSB decking. So when the sun hits this metal roof, that metal gets really, really hot. And if it's touching the roof, then you get convection transfer of heat into the house, and you get a lot of heat transfer that way. The way I've done it is I've spaced that metal off of the house, and I have an air gap that's under there. So when the sun heats up this metal, it also heats up the air in between the sheet metal and the felt paper on the other side of the 2x4. So there, that 1.5 inch gap there, that air begins to heat up. As it heats up, it travels up the roof through the ribs of the metal and then out the top of the house where there's a vent cap. So because I have a place for the bottom of the roof to pull in air that's cool, and as the air heats, it travels up the roof and then out the top, it's always pulling cool air in at the bottom, and a lot of the heat that gets put into the sheet metal does not make its way into the attic of the house. So the interior of this house is already a lot cooler than if I had just screwed that metal directly to the roof of the house. And when I come back and do my insulation, we're going to spray foam the underside of the house and try and eliminate the rest of the transfer of heat into the house as much as we can. So we're going to have a sealed attic on this house when we do it, and the attic temperature should be within about 10 degrees of the air-conditioned house. So I won't ever have a 120, 130 degree attic temperature in this house the way that I'm doing it. And that's why I have the horizontal 2x4s, is so that I can get an airflow up under the tin to help reduce the amount of heat that comes into the house. So Banyan Tree asked me, he said the roof looks really good and it reflects a lot of work, especially the complexity of the corners and the dormers. Did you get a commercial quote? I would be interested in the contractors versus your time to complete, and I also assume you get some type of warranty with a professional installation. Yeah, you would. If a professional came out and installed it, you'd absolutely get a warranty on it. I did not get any quotes for doing the roof, because one of the things I want to do on the house is do as much of it as I feel like I'm capable of doing, and the tin is not really that complicated. It's slow. The dormers, they do add a level of complexity to it, but it's nothing that can't be done. It's all fairly straightforward. So I didn't get any quotes on it. I do have like I said, the warranty on the metal. It's a 40-year warranty, and if there's any leaks, well, those are on me. So I figure if I can build the whole house, though, I can keep an eye out for leaks, and if I get any of them, then I'll just take care of them. But so far, we've had quite a bit of rain on the house once I finished the roof, and I haven't found any leaks on it whatsoever. So I'm pretty happy with it. All right, in episode 53, Dow Press said, glad to see you got a pneumatic nail gun. I was feeling sorry for you when you were nailing the floor joist by hand. And yeah, my intention was never to build the entire house by hand, but I did want to build some of it by hand, and that was kind of just for a connection to my dad, to be honest. When I was a small child, my dad actually built our house, and he built it all by hand. No power tools whatsoever. Completely off-grid, single-handed from start to finish. And he did a phenomenal job on it. And it took him a very long time to do that. And my dad has since passed away, but I always envied his carpentry skills. And when I was starting off building the house, I did start off nailing by hand, just as kind of a little bit of a throwback to him, for a connection, I guess. But yeah, my intention was always to get a pneumatic nail gun. I did not want to nail every nail by hand like Dad did. But I appreciate the concern there. So David Sharp asked me in episode 56, how big is my homestead? And the homestead is 16 acres. Actually, it's, I think, just a hair over 16 acres. The local paper mill company had a section of land, about 160 acres, and they divided that up into plots ranging from 13 acres up to 40-something acres. But the majority of them were right around 20-something acres. And they put them up for sale, and they were asking about $6,500 an acre. Now, this is all raw land. There's no water, there's no power, no nothing. And they had them up for sale for a while, and they never did sell. So at the end of the year, what they did was they went and they put it all up for sale on a land auction. My wife and I went to the land auction, and we won first bid. And what that allowed us to do was pick our choice of how many lots we wanted and which lots we wanted. So I had already come out and walked all of the land, and the Mazarn Creek is over here behind us, and it's my back property line. And of that 140, 160 acres, however much it was, all of the land out by the creek is very low. And when this creek rises, you know, you've got flooding potential. But this one spot that I'm on raises up about 30 feet above the creek in the back. And I absolutely fell in love with it. I wanted a house on that little knoll from the time that I saw it. And the land off to both sides of me is kind of low in the back. So anybody that builds on the lots to either side of us, they're going to have to build out closer to the road. So right now, where my house is sitting, I cannot see any other structures, no other houses, buildings, or anything. And even if somebody builds or buys the lots to either side of us and decides to build, most likely that's going to continue to be the case. And I kind of like that secluded feeling and being able to see the creek from the back porch. So we picked this particular lot, which was 16 acres to build, strictly because of this little knoll. And we're looking forward to getting the house done so we can get out here and start developing the exterior buildings. We've got the garden fenced in already, but we've got some shops to build and a garage and several other outbuildings. So right now it's 16 acres and it's still pretty undeveloped, but we're going to change that one step at a time. Episode 58. If I had to point my finger to one mistake that I've made that the most users have commented on and pointed out, it would be episode 58, where I started putting the sheathing on the exterior walls. And the first row of sheathing that I put up vertical instead of horizontal. And a lot of the builders out there came back and said, no, that's not right. You have to do it horizontal. You get more shear strength. I don't dispute that. I will say, however, I know of a lot of houses that are built with just 2x4 walls and T111 siding. They've been up 30 or 40 years and they're still standing without any problems. So I'm not certain that the difference in shear strength is that big of an issue. I'm not down in Florida where I've got hurricanes and things like that coming through all the time. Shear strength is important to me though, and everything above that first row is done horizontal instead of vertical. But the first row, I was putting it up by myself, and it just seemed to me like a good choice to do it vertical. I was able to layer a lot of that over the rim joist to tie the house to the rim joist. so that there wouldn't be any air leakage there and there wouldn't be any uplift. And yeah, so I did it vertically. It probably wasn't the best choice, but I don't believe it's going to be a negative overall as far as the quality of the house. So I'm not concerned about it, and I'm not going back and trying to change it. But yeah, if you're watching my series and you're going to build your own house, keep it in mind. You're supposed to put your sheathing horizontal, not vertical. Okay? All right, so back in episode 60, Larry Jones asked me when I was setting my windows in what brand of windows I bought and where did I get them. Well, the window manufacturer is called Window Mart, and it's a local company to me here, and they distribute windows all over the U.S. Most of the windows that you find in box stores like Lowe's and Home Depot and stuff like that, they're going to come from somebody like Window Mart. And they actually sell out of the office there, so you can buy them direct from the manufacturer and get a little bit of a discount on them there. So that's what I did. I went to the window manufacturer that's close by here, and I bought them locally, and the brand is Window Mart. All right, so back in episode 69, B. Webb asked me, where did I learn to do this? I was just starting to put my siding up, and they wanted to know how I learned to do all of this. Was this a trade that I do for a living, or did I read it, learn how to do it by reading books or watching YouTube videos, or where did I get the expertise to do this? And no, I am not a carpenter by trade. I do network engineering or telecommunications for a living. Construction is nowhere near my trade. My exposure to home building, the first exposure I guess I had was when my dad built our own home back when I was in 3rd grade. So I got to watch him do that, like I said, completely off-grid, all hand tools, pretty much by himself. He occasionally had a little help from the kids and mom and from my grandfather, but for the most part, he built the whole house, by himself. So I had exposure to it then. I got to see the framework of it, and I guess I wasn't extremely intimidated by it because I had already seen my dad build one. Even though I didn't really learn from it how to do it, I had the exposure to it. I also helped a close friend build an off-grid cabin here recently. I was just a helping hand on that. He ran the show on it. But again, I got exposure to it. Now, he did hire somebody to come out and frame up the walls and the roof and everything, and we just did the mechanical systems inside and the siding and the flooring and that kind of stuff. But still, that was a little bit more exposure, and learned a little bit from that. And then also, I'd have to say another place I learned a lot was from YouTube, watching videos from a professional carpenter called Larry Hahn. And if you're interested in building your own house, look him up. He's really good, very easy to understand. He makes complicated things simple. And if you're interested in learning how to frame up a house, I would definitely go on YouTube and look up Larry Hahn and see. I think he did a 6-part series on framing up a house, and it's very good. And also, I've gotten some construction books from the local bookstore. So, a little bit of everything is where I picked it up. And I don't profess to be an expert on any of this, but overall, there's nothing in a house that is just extremely complicated. You just break it down into small parts. You research it out until you understand what you're doing, and then you move forward. So, if you're interested in doing it, don't let it intimidate you, and don't think, oh, I'm not capable or I don't have the expertise to do it. The expertise can be found very readily from bookstores and YouTube. If you're interested in building, give it a go. It's worthwhile. All right, so back in episode 90, I was framing up the laundry room, and Brian Gatewood asked me what type of insulation I was going to use in the house. Was I going to use closed cell foam, open cell foam, or rock wool? And I have to say, up until he asked me that question, my intention was to use open cell foam under the floor or under the house, in the exterior walls and on the attic ceiling. However, I had never heard of this rock wool insulation that he mentioned. So I went and I did a little research on it, and it's a pretty neat insulation. It's made from a volcanic rock that's crushed up and then processed, and it actually has a higher R value than the spray foam does. And it's quite a bit cheaper, and it's do-it-yourself, where the spray foam I have to hire somebody to come out and do it. So after I looked at it, I think probably what's going to happen is I'm going to use a combination of the open cell foam and the rock wool. I still have to talk to a insulation person about the open cell foam, but right now I'm thinking I'm probably going to spray open cell foam in the attic ceiling and then use rock wool in the exterior walls and the underneath of the house. So I appreciate the question, because it turned me on to a product that I didn't know about, and I think that's probably something I'm actually going to wind up using. So thanks for the question, Brian. All right, so back in episode 92, I was doing the house wrap, and I was putting the Tyvek on, and Billy Roberts says the house will be great looking when it's finished. So the purpose of the Tyvek is to seal the house. I guess he was unclear what the purpose of house wrap is. But the Tyvek is a moisture barrier. So the lap siding that I put on the house is not really going to keep 100% of the water from getting behind it. You have two pieces of the siding that come together, and that's not caulked. There's an open gap between that. Now there is a flashing behind it to try and keep water out, and that flashing is to pull water back towards the front of the siding and get it out. But you do have potential for a driving rain to get on the siding and actually blow it up, so it could go under the bottom of a piece of siding. There are ways for water to get behind your lap siding. So the purpose of the Tyvek or the vapor barrier is that it prevents that water from getting into the sheathing of the house. It gives a place for that water to hit and then run down and come out at the bottom of the wall. But it is a permeable surface so that air can move through it. If water does get on the sheathing of the house, that water can dry to the outside. The Tyvek is a breathable mesh, so water is not supposed to be able to go through it, but air can flow back out of it, and moisture can come out, but it won't let water run into it. So that's the purpose of it, is to keep the majority of the water that gets behind the lap boards off of the sheathing, and any water that does get on the sheathing to allow it to dry to the outside and not stay trapped in the wall and cause mold. All right, so episode 96, Connor Ness asked me if I was going to paint or otherwise cover the block work or the concrete, which is the cinder block that you see behind me, the gray part. And yeah, I am going to cover it. It's not going to get painted, but what's going to happen is I'm going to put a stone veneer over the top of that. So here in Arkansas, we have a lot of rock quarries, and once the house is done, my wife and I are going to go to the quarry and pick out a color of stone that we like, and then we're going to bring some of that back, and we're going to cover this foundation with the stone from the local quarry with probably 2-inch thick slabs of natural stone. So it will get covered, but it's not going to get covered until the rest of the house is completed, because it's just an aesthetics issue. You know, it doesn't affect the longevity of the house. So yes, we are going to cover the stone up, or the blocks up, but it's going to be a while before we do that. All right, so in episode 97, DL asked me, I was in the process of clearing out the right-of-way for the power line, and he was asking about a price comparison between paying to have the power company run power lines out here and hook my house up on grid versus taking that money and investing into a solar setup for off-grid. And I did consider that, but in our particular scenario, it doesn't make a lot of sense for me. My particular scenario is I've got a pretty big house here, 2,500 square feet to heat and cool, because I have somebody here 24 hours a day, and I'm working from here. My full-time job is from home, So I've got a pretty good power requirement. That means I've got to have a pretty good solar setup if that's what I'm going with, and that's expensive. Now, if I had to pay to run the power outline in all the way to my house, definitely the cost of that would be a sizable chunk of an off-grid system, and it may make more sense to go off-grid. But with my setup, the power company will pay for the first 800 feet of the power line, and that's per household. And since my in-laws are also going to put a house out here on this land, they're going to have to be hooked up to the grid as well. So that's 1,600 feet of power line that I get that's paid for, and that's pretty close to the total run for how far they've got to bring the power. So what I'm hoping is when we get both houses ready for power, they give me a 1,600 foot allotment. The overall charge to bring power into the two houses is not going to be very high, and it definitely makes more sense for us to go on grid rather than having two households build off-grid power setup and have to change their lifestyle from on-grid to off-grid, because your lifestyle does change if you go completely off-grid from being on-grid. You know, you don't use as much power as you want anytime you want it. You have to plan out your power consumption a little bit. So in my particular case, no, I'm not going to be going off-grid. I did give it some consideration, but like I said, there's too many factors that make more sense for me to go on-grid, so that's what we're going to wind up doing. And I think that's going to be all the questions I do for this episode. It's probably running kind of long now, and we're going to wrap it up. We're almost done with the ceiling joist inside, so we should have those ceiling joists finished up and the sheetrock backers all put in so I can start my mechanical work. I'm currently researching the plumbing supplies that I want to use. I'm going to be using a on-demand water heater, so I'm trying to get that one selected, and I'm trying to select the PEX pipe and fittings that I want to use, and water manifold and all that sort of stuff. So once I've got all those things settled on, I can go ahead and get them ordered, and we can start doing some plumbing. And I've got somebody that's going to help me do the wiring on the house that does wiring for a living, so I'll have some expertise helping me do that phase of it. And I'm kind of on their waiting list, so whenever they can get to me, we're going to jump on the wiring. So hopefully the mechanical portion of the house is going to be coming along here pretty quick, and I hope y'all will keep checking back and seeing how the progress is. But I think the overall consensus I've got on it is, if you want to know whether it's worth building your own house, absolutely. Like I said, I'm saving right now. I'm on par to save about 50% of the cost of the house by doing it myself. And I've gotten some upgraded materials along the way because I'm doing it myself that, due to the cost savings, I can reinvest in better materials. So if you're interested in building yourself and you're able-bodied, I definitely highly recommend it. You don't have to have the knowledge and expertise ahead of time. It's easy to come by. Books and videos are everywhere with the information. The only thing you're really going to have to check with is building code requirements. I'm out here in the county, so I don't have a building inspector in our area. I had to get a permit to make sure that I could build in the particular location and certify it was not in a floodplain, because I'm close to the creek. But other than that, our county doesn't require permits. So anything that I build out here, I'm the one that has to make sure it's right. I've got to make sure my family's safe and that what I'm building is a good value, and that if something came up and we had to sell it, that it's transferable to another owner and that somebody else would actually want it. So that is a responsibility. You know, the building inspector is not necessarily your enemy. They're there to make sure that your work is up to a certain quality, and that's a good thing. But out here in the county where I'm at, I don't have a building inspector. So if you do have a building inspector, you need to touch base with them pretty often. You need to make sure you know what the local building codes are, and you need to make sure that you're up to them. But don't let that intimidate you and stop you from building your own house, because it's very doable, and certainly one person can do it by themselves. I'd say probably 90% of this I've done by myself while filming it. So, you know, if you're able-bodied and you have a determination to build your own house, you can do it. So get out there and design your own house and start building. That's my recommendation. You'll really be proud of the product when you're finished with it. A lot more than if you just hired somebody to come out and build a house and you took on a 30-year note. Every month you're gonna regret having to write that check out, and you're gonna grow to resent that house potentially. But you build it yourself, then you got pride in it, and it can be paid for as you're going, and I highly recommend it. So anyway, I'm gonna quit rambling now. That's it for this episode, and y'all keep checking back.